Welcome to Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Today we have Jason Miller from the USDA and Ruth Beck from the South Dakota State University. Both of them are going to chat with us about no-tillage farming. It's very interesting to push no-tillage farming today as we look for a more sustainable agriculture. I'm going to start with Jason because he sent me a study regarding the growth of no-tillage farming in South Dakota, and the numbers are really interesting. The conventional tillage in South Dakota dropped from 17 to 16%, and no tillage at all jumped from 37% to 45%. Jason, how are you? How can you explain that?
Well, we've been the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is an agency under USDA, has been conducting a tillage survey or a cropping systems inventory across South Dakota for a number of years. We were doing it, conducting the survey every year from middle 1990s through 2004. And then we had some budget issues, so they dropped it for a number of years and resumed it back in 2013 or 15. So what you described there was the difference from 2004 to 2017, the 37% no-till in 2004 to 45% no-till in 2017. The explanation of that is, more guys are, the area is just expanding throughout South Dakota. We have the traditional areas that have been high percentage of no-till has been throughout the central part of the state. And that has expanded west quite far. And then east is probably our biggest challenge, is trying to get guys to no-till continuously further east in eastern South Dakota. But we had a number of guys. When we look at really the commonalities amongst the successful no-tillers over the years, really can be attributed to diverse crop rotations, minimal soil disturbance, increasing the cropping intensity by including high water use crops amongst low water use crops, and then heavy emphasis on sanitation and competition practices such as fertilizer placement, row spacing differences, and so forth. So those are probably the biggest reasons for the growth in no-till in South Dakota over those years.
Yeah, now I would like to hear from Ruth Beck. She's an agronomy specialist. And Ruth, what can you add about the advantages of adopting this technique?
I mean, we see a lot of advantages out here with no-till. We have some large areas that are very susceptible to soil erosion from both wind. In the summer, we get those heavy rainstorms that can also move soil. So leaving that residue really helps to protect that soil, keep it on the fields where we want it, not let it run into our rivers and our streams, and it can affect air quality. We've seen that on where it's literally stopped traffic in certain areas, really very recently, in recent years. So out here we really notice those benefits, and we're typically a drier area, so the people in this region just really saw the benefit of not working the ground, so that the rain we get goes in the ground, and it just conserves moisture, so that when we do get into those hot months of the year and want to keep our corn growing in good condition, that's when we really see the benefits out here. So
So some places adopt more of no-tillage and some places less. I'm originally from the deep south of Brazil, and now I'm living in Argentina. And in those places, almost every grain farmer use no-tillage farming. Why do you think South Dakota uses more of that compared to other places in the U.S.?
The big reason, Dr. Dwayne Beck would be my he understood the economics behind it, and then the farmers quickly followed as far as implementing his philosophy on farming. I mean, you look at diverse crop rotations, what that does for spreading workload and spreading equipment costs over larger acres, because you have different planting and harvesting dates. That's huge. That decrease equipment costs greatly on a per acre basis, and overall it increased net farm income. And guys quickly realized that after he came to or started the no-till in South Dakota. So it kind of mushroomed from this area and all throughout the Central Plains, really.
Ruth?
Well, I think I would definitely agree with Jason, and I just want to say, we've heard stories, from people back in the late 80s when the weather was very dry and they were farming, and they'd come and visit the research farm where Dwayne was managing using the no-till practices, and they'd notice how much better his crops looked because, he had that moisture that he hadn't wasted by using tillage. And I think that just that visual for farmers really started selling it. And you get a few guys working with this management practice, and a lot of times, the neighbors might see it and think, well, I think I need to try that. It looks pretty good. And yeah, so over the years, we've, just seen it grow especially in the drier regions in this state.
What makes some farmers skeptical of that?
I mean, change is hard. I think people don't want to change. They've seen success and some, very good years using practices that they've always used. They don't understand some things, the fact that tillage can seal pores and actually reduce the amount of water that your ground can take in or your soils can take in. I think people don't actually understand that. I mean, I'm not saying everyone, but some don't. So just being around that. But we are seeing more people adopt it over on the east side of the state. And so hopefully, and then markets, some of these other crops that we grow, markets are a little harder to access, and that can be limiting, I think.
Jason, is there any number that could prove higher yields for the use of no-tillage there in South Dakota?
Yeah, it's hard to do. Dwayne has, ever since came to Pier in 1990, he hasn't ever done a tillage comparison, really. He's done different crop rotations and looking at different cropping intensities as far as number of low water use crops and high water use crops and various different rotation strategies. But to do a tillage study would basically double the amount of land required to do that. And with limited budgets from SDSU or South Dakota State University, it was hard for them to be able to do tillage comparison studies in a given area. There is one research firm in the Southeast and that has done some comparisons amongst tillage studies. Here, we just see that our crop, specifically our corn yield, which corn wasn't very commonly planted around here. It traditionally was a small grain fallow rotation, a summer fallow, where it was left idle for for quite a few months to store soil water, for the wheat crop. The corn yields have continuously, well, actually all the crops have continuously increased in yield, but corn specifically, the warm season grasses has dramatically increased over the years. So guys just aren't willing, really, for the most part, to go back to any tillage, just because, they're spread. They cover a lot of acres. The farms out here are fairly significant in size compared to other places in throughout South Dakota. So just trying to find a manpower. It's very difficult for farmers anymore around here to find the manpower to be able to have, 5 guys and a couple of them are tilling the ground or whatever. We just don't have the time to be able to get that done feasibly.
Ruth, what would you recommend to a farmer that is thinking on using no-tillage? Here you go.
So making that conversion, I think, you might want to use limited acres and see how that works. You might want to, get to know other no-till farmers. I think the connections that our no-tillers and the community that they have is very strong. And I think they're really willing to get out and help and provide advice, other farmers. There's a huge mentor group here in South Dakota that the NRCS has put together, and almost anywhere across the state you can find somebody who I think would answer some questions, be dealing with the situation you're dealing with, and would help you through some of that. So I would definitely recommend people start at those points.
Jason, do you have something to add?
Okay, there. Yeah, in SDSU actually you guys just put together a fact sheet on getting started, basically. That looked pretty good. I did, Dwayne Beck and myself, and then Matt Hagney, who was originally from South Dakota, who just recently passed away this last year. We wrote a paper back in 1998 that both Matt and I presented at the ASA meeting in Baltimore, the American Society of Agronomy, on successful no-till in Central and Northern Plains. I took this same philosophy on this paper and presented it in Argentina back in 1999. I can forward you that paper, and that's going to give you a lot of the background of the reason for success in these areas throughout the central part of the Great Plains that may be of benefit to you. But yeah, Ruth nailed it there. There's a large support network system in South Dakota, ranging from no-till to cover crops to grazing the cropland to a whole host of things, and even on the rangeland side also. There's some mentors out there for that. So we're fortunate to have a huge mentor network in South Dakota when it comes to soil health practices.
And Jason, over the most recent years, you mentioned the study until 2017, you have seen continued growth of no-tillage from 2017 until now?
Yeah, we do it every other year. We started that back up in 2013 or 15. I can't remember. I'd have to look back, but we do that every other year, a tillage survey. And this last year was a very abnormal year. We were really wet across the big section of South Dakota. And then last year's numbers were showing a 50% no-till. 50% of the acres were no-till in South Dakota. Now, you kind of have to put an asterisk on that number because we had 4 million acres that were unplanted. So it's hard to say, those weren't counted in the system. What have they been tilled? What have they not been tilled? So we've been hovering right around between 45 and 50% for the last, I would say, 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And taking advantage that you both are from South Dakota and you are here now, what can you comment about the situation, about the current crop season there? Ruth, how the weather has treated you in recent days, and how has that affected the crop?
You know, we've had a nice spring here. A lot of the guys had a nice piece or window in the spring to get some of our early crops in, like spring wheat and field peas, oats, which just didn't happen last year. We just had a ton of snow in March, and we couldn't get in. And it's important for them to get in early for those crops because we get hot in midsummer. They need to get the benefit of that early growth to really yield well. We've had some rains. I don't think we've been excessively wet in most areas, although I did hear, and Jason, I think, has more information on, there is some regions that are wet. So, it's variable. We're very variable in South Dakota. I've heard the northwest part of the state's a little bit dry. So, but for the most part, I think we're in much better shape this year than last year.
Jason.
Yep. Overall, I agree with that. We do have some pockets that have still been really struggling getting corn in the ground. There's a few guys still trying to punch some corn in the ground, and this will be probably the final week. And we just received, some of these areas just received enough rain to stop them again for today, just last night and this morning again. So yeah, we have pockets. Overall, we're much better shape than we were last year, but we still have pockets where guys are still struggling trying to get something planted into some of these fields that were excessively wet yet from last year. And some areas did have, a fair amount of snow, and that was slow to melt about an hour north of here. So overall, again, if we can get in the next 10 days, I think most guys will be completely wrapped up with the majority of their crop planting. But there are some dry pockets. Surprisingly, there's a few areas that are needing some rain. A good inch and a half amount of rain would be greatly welcomed in some areas, just because we had 2 days this week that were right around 90 to 92 degrees, and it was hot, and some of those areas just didn't have the moisture earlier. So some of the grasses and some of the small grains have been hurt just a little bit. But overall, I think we're sitting in pretty decent shape this year so far.
Ruth, is there something would you like to add about no-tillage?
The only thing I could say is one thing is I've had the opportunity to meet, people from not just this region, but really across the world. And I remember meeting an older gentleman a number of years ago. He was from England, and he said to me, he'd farmed for a long time, and what he said to me is converting to no-till and using some of the soil health tactics to run his farm had really rejuvenated his interest and his care about what he was doing. And I thought that was really a nice way to look at it. He felt good about farming again. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Jason?
Boy, no, I think I probably said a lot there. I mean, it's something that it's definitely the right path to go down. We just have some guys. I mean, we just need to continue to work on keeping the lead guys going forward, and we need to expand a little bit further in the eastern part of the state, which is typically a lot wetter, and it's always been a struggle to. A lot of the guys still feel they need to do something over there, but we do have some key lead guys that have been strictly no-till for a number of years over there. We just need to expand that area out. So overall, although I feel really good about the progress that we've made in South Dakota.
Okay, we will help. Ruth from the South Dakota State University and Jason Miller from the USDA. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.